just to finish off what I was saying in the last video, the lactate threshold, so when lactate begins to be produced, will start almost straight away after the beginning of exercise. The OBLA is the mark where most endurance athletes want to stay below, because at this point this is when we start working anaerobically, and this is around 4 millimoles. And athletes want to try and stay below this as the anaerobic fatiguing symptoms such as muscle soreness begin to become an issue, and this is obviously athletes want to stop this from happening in order to ensure performance remains high. So now moving on to the submaximal intensity and low duration activities. Aerobic exercise will mean that the aerobic system is of course being used, but the ATP, PC and lactic acid system will be required at the beginning just to ensure the aerobic system is able to start and be ready to go. The energy sources used here are glycogen, carbohydrates, fats and muscle proteins. Aerobic exercise is not as fatiguing as the other systems, as oxygen demand is met by the supply of oxygen, so we can work for a considerably longer period of time. And the sporting examples of these are marathon running, cycling as in road racing, and triathlons. The RER will be lower than 1 as oxygen demand is being able to be meet the CO2 levels. Glycogen depletion occurs during aerobic exercise, and this is something that athletes want to try and avoid glycogen depletion. As we can see in the graph below, light exercise uses a lesser percentage of glycogen content, and this is why athletes want to try and work under that 4 millimoles mark, under the onset of blood lactate mark, because that is when they begin to use glycogen and start working anaerobically, and you have the same issues with the muscle soreness and the more intense fatiguing factors becoming a problem more quickly. So in order to try and ensure that there's not a balance in glucose level, regulation takes place. However, when low blood lactate levels are found, this is called hyperglycemia, and hyperglycemia will take place before, or will be a problem before glycogenesis takes place, and this is an issue because it will begin to fatigue our central nervous system, so the messages won't get around the body quicker, so that will lead to symptoms such as dizziness, sweating, and we become anxious. This is also described. Can be described as bonking, and of course these are all an issue. This obviously occurs when glycogen levels actually fall below 4 millimoles per litre. Right, blood glucose. Lower levels for prolonged exercise. So this means that the longer we work, the more these blood glucose levels will decrease, as we're using the carbohydrates as a key energy source for this longer period, this longer activity. We're needing to replace those carbohydrates that we are using in exercise frequently. And this is shown in the graph below. You can see that there's an increase in blood glucose once these grams of carbohydrates are on board. And so this is where glucose ingestion becomes so important. So this is why you'll see marathon runners eating sachets, as it just gives them that extra boost of energy to ensure that they can complete the race while maintaining a higher quality of performance by it being able to push their body without those fatiguing factors maybe becoming as much of an issue as they could be. So yeah, and obviously drinks are regularly taken, so the Lucozades and stuff like that, to ensure that those carbohydrate levels don't fall below and affect the blood lactate level, glucose levels. Sorry. So this is where carbo loading began to become a massive part of the marathon running. It was a concept devised by Howlett in 1977, or at least he did some experiments into the theory. So it's carbo loading improves endurance, as obviously as seen before. It stops those blood glucose levels depleting below a level where we don't want them, where it will become fatiguing. We'll have to use our glycogen levels, our glycogen, in order to try and replace this issue. And so the format of what most marathon runners will look at imploding into their training is 6 to 4 days before, where they've been training so hard for the event, their blood glucose levels will be at a low, so they obviously won't be ready. They won't have those levels in order to compete. So 3 to 1 days, they then replace those with high intakes of carbohydrates, and this will continue probably all the way up to the morning of the event, and during the event, of course, when those levels become low again. And finally, fat stores. Fat stores are important, as they are what most endurance athletes want to use. When working submaximally, we want to use fats, as they're easily burnt, and ideally we don't want to be using our muscle proteins, as it's kind of counterproductive. You're burning your own muscle, and it doesn't allow the athlete to see the real benefits of participating in that exercise. Right, moving on to the intermittent activities. So the intermittent activities will include all energy systems, however at different times. They're game events, so at different points you'll be using your different systems, your ATP, your PC, your lactic acid system, and your aerobic system. The waste products of this will therefore be anywhere from CO2, your lactic acid, H2O, and heat. They'll all be an issue here, as you're using all your different systems. Also, depletion of acetylcholine and cholinesterase are particularly evident in these activities. And sporting examples of these include football, netball, and rugby. Right, acetylcholine is vitally important, as we're looking at the depletion of both acetylcholine and cholinesterase. But acetylcholine is so important to begin with, as it acts at the neuromuscular junctions, and it allows the motor neurons to carry signals from the motor neuron to the skeletal muscles, and it transfers nerve impulses across the synaptic gap, obviously, and this helps to initiate muscle contraction, and this ensures that the muscles are contracting and working as they should be. If there is a significant level of actor liking at the receptor sites, then this will of course mean that contractions can't take place and fatigue happens at an increased pace, which of course is a major issue for those wanting to participate. Cholinesterase is also cholinesterase is also vitally important, as it almost prepares actor liking to contract. So it's an enzyme that breaks it down after this has taken place, to ensure that it can repeatedly be used at the receptor sites. And a lack of cholinesterase will of course lead to an imbalance in the amount of actor liking, which will mean that it can't be broken down and the cycle can't happen as efficiently as it should, meaning that muscle contractions are going to suffer, as there's no, as you can see on the screen, no new action potential. So this will lead to, of course, fatigue, as there is no ability to regenerate and recreate contractions. Now moving on to the nerve impulses and the different chemicals that, or waste products of the body, that have an effect on the impulses and how they can help or hinder the effects So firstly, potassium. Potassium is vitally important, as of course it helps our body to ensure, and our central nervous system, to ensure that impulses are moving as quickly to the areas needed as possible. So when when a reducing potassium happens, these impulses will happen slower, the body will react slower, contractions will happen slower, and fatigue will begin to take place. Hydrogen then plays a massive part, as an increase in hydrogen will lead to a decrease in the velocity of muscle fibers, as mentioned there. But an increase in hydrogen also means an increase in acidity, which is why that conduction velocity will decrease, because obviously the blood is just too acidic, and there is that problem. This will also lower the twitch tension, meaning the contractions cannot happen as hard as they used to, and leading to a decrease in power. And all of this affects the frequency as well. The frequency of stimuluses will of course be decreased, as the velocity can just, as the blood just becomes too acidic. And overall, as mentioned before, of course this leads to a decrease in force generated. Calcium is of course important. Calcium is of course important because it's needed in order for the sliding filament theory to happen. So the calcium changes the shape of the myosin arm to ensure that the binding site becomes available. This can then mean the muscle can pull and the cross bridge can be created, and the contraction can take place. This decrease in calcium will of course mean that the calcium which pumps out at the sarcoplasmic reticulum will decrease, and muscle contractions won't be able to happen as frequently, as quickly, and as hard, which of course will massively affect the levels of fatigue. So looking at the waste products and created in this section, and of course it is a massive effect to have high levels of carbon dioxide, which are created during these exercises. And there are three ways in which